Right now, it seems pretty self-evident that Final Fantasy XVI is a failure. People don't want to meme on this like they did with Forspoken because, this is a big epidemic, right? This is a big thing for the anti-Nintendo community because Final Fantasy is, alongside Metal Gear Solid, one of the brands, the brand, I would argue, that propped up PlayStation for the past 25 years. Up until Final Fantasy X came out, like Final Fantasy was the series that kept PlayStation relevant in the eyes of the non-Nintendo community. Like people saw like those crazy visuals, those gorgeous character models, or those in-depth stories, and thought they were extremely cutting edge, the most mature stories in gaming, right? The most cutting edge, high tech, high def, like things imaginable. And, for decades after Final Fantasy X, after the series lost relevancy, that mindset continued to a certain extent. Final Fantasy 12, 11, 13, 14, 15, like all of them got an extreme amount of hype simply because they were Final Fantasy games. This was an event. The series wasn't as big as it used to be, but it's still Final Fantasy. It still has dedicated fans worldwide. It's still one of the big names in PlayStation. And now, 25 years later, it's all finally coming crashing down. Finally, people have realized that, I don't really like Final Fantasy anymore. Final Fantasy 15 was disappointing. I don't care for any of these spin-offs. I don't care with what Square Enix is doing with the brand. They ruined Final Fantasy 7. And, Final Fantasy 16 looks pretty gay. Not gonna lie. I'm not interested in anything that Final Fantasy 16 has to offer. I am just going to peace out and go do something else. And that's kind of been the mindset. Unlike back in the PS1 days with Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy does have does have a number of healthy competitors. You have Xenoblade, you have Pokemon, you have Persona. You have all these series that have just kind of exploded in popularity because Final Fantasy hasn't really been doing what it used to do with its stellar turn-based combat and just engaging original stories. Final Fantasy is a parody of its former self, and nobody wants to admit that. Nobody wants to admit that Square Enix fell off because if people ever asked where it all went wrong, where Final Fantasy fell off, you are inevitably going to go back to the very beginning of when they went PlayStation exclusive with Final Fantasy VII, because that is exactly when things kicked off. That is exactly when they decided to produce the movie The Spirits Within, which led to the bankruptcy of Squaresoft, which happened within 5 years, which led to the merger with Enix, which led to where we are now, where the company is just constantly making serious errors in judgment, in business decisions, and which consoles it supports. Right? The fan base for these classic turn-based Japanese RPGs have been Nintendo only for a long time now. Right? Nobody plays this stuff on Xbox, nobody plays it on PlayStation, nobody plays it on PC, and yet, for some reason, Square Enix still religiously throws all of its weight behind PlayStation, right? Forspoken was supposed to be their next big thing, right? Kingdom Hearts 3 was supposed to be big. Final Fantasy 15 was supposed to be big. And Final Fantasy 16 was supposed to be the big PS5 system seller for this year, right? It was supposed to be huge. And by the way things are looking, I legit saw speculation on 4chan last night that Super Mario RPG might actually outsell Final Fantasy 16. And if that happens, if a remake of a Nintendo exclusive, the last Nintendo exclusive that Squaresoft ever produced, by the way, if that ever gets made, if that ever comes out, if that happens, right, Square Enix is going to be unable to deny the obvious, right? In that supporting PlayStation for all this time has killed their brand, right? There's just going to be no recovery. 5-10 years ago, I would have said for all of these third parties that all you would have to do in order to recover is just focus on making good games on Nintendo hardware. That's all you had to do, right? The last time Ubisoft was relevant, I would say, was when they were putting out Zombie U and Rayman Legends and really, really interesting, unique stuff like that. Yeah, now it wasn't the best stuff ever by any means, but it was something, right? And then what happened? They abandoned Nintendo hardware for no reason, and they just immediately fall off, right? Same thing happened to Konami. Same thing is happening to Capcom, and the same thing happened to Square Enix. It is just an inevitability. For if you don't support the biggest gaming platform on the market, you're just going to fall off hard. And this isn't just a minor fall off here. Like, this is a big mainline Final Fantasy, the project that Square Enix thought would always succeed, always bring in the cash, always be successful, is now just being criticized by fans and casual players the world over. Like, I was really harsh towards Final Fantasy VII-R, right? And I was disappointed with like the sheer amount of like fanboys and like shills who came out and defended it. Angry Joe, Max Dude, countless of these people. But I cannot reiterate enough how it feels like these influencers are not influencing anyone. Like, Susie Hunter is on Twitter right now trying to tell us that, like, oh man, if Final Fantasy 16 isn't a real game, why am I spending so much time grinding for the best ultimate weapon to beat the final boss? Hey, genius, probably because you're being paid to do it, assuming you're even doing it yourself. Like, that you cannot. These people are not going to be able to convince the real fans, okay? The real fans are turning against the brand. They're, pushing back against it. And not only are they not, like, buying into Square Enix's shit, not only are they criticizing the game for what they're doing, we are beginning to, like, stop supporting the company. Octopath Traveler 2, I was so disappointed in that game, after loving the original, that I seriously do think that, like, going forward, I'm going to be a bit more, like, selective when it comes to Square Enix purchases, even if they come out on Nintendo hardware, right? Because that game was, like, budget as fuck. It felt rushed. The story didn't make any sense. It was just, like, an underwhelming experience compared to, like, the amazing original, right? Like, I love Octopath Traveler 2. I loved the original Octopath Traveler, but, like, 2 was just, like, so asinine. I couldn't get behind it at all. I was very, very disappointed. But with Final Fantasy 16, like, I'm not gonna buy that. Like, some of the trailers, I thought it looked interesting. I love dark fantasy. I love, like, the Attack on Titan vibe. I love like the whole, like, aesthetic of, like, Final Fantasy stuff. But, like, the more I looked at this game, the more I realized that, like, I wasn't interested in this game at all. When I saw the gameplay, I was completely, like, 100% turned off, like, immediately. And I can't imagine that the vast majority of the audience didn't do the exact same thing. This game did not have any of the hype behind it that Final Fantasy 15 did, right? People would, like, try and tell you Final Fantasy 15 was good, was going to be good, like, before launch. With 16, it's like, it feels completely different. It feels like this is the end of the brand. It feels like the brand has just, like, run itself into the ground and there's no hope of recovery. And it is entirely Square Enix's fault.